know I love that organic cooking. I always ask for more. And they call me Mr. Natural. On down to the health food store.
12:33. Welcome back to Doug Pagitt Radio, broadcasting live in the Twin Cities and around the world, and maybe even on the space station over at DougPagitRadio.com. And that is the theme song for natural health coach Shelley Pagitt, who is not with us today.
Yeah.
She is no longer with us today.
Well,
Just today. She's not with us today. She's off on retreat. She's off at a monastery or a covenantry with a bunch of women.
Yeah, shout out to those ladies.
Yeah, a bunch of people from the community that I'm part of, the church that I'm a part of. They're the women are off having a women's retreat. We have no idea what they're doing or what they're coming back. The sort of Lilith Fest, that retreat that
easy
they're,
for you to say.
Yeah, that they're off having. And there was no intentional lisping there. John White has joined us though. John White is a friend of this radio program and is a friend of mine and has written a snappy little blog post explaining what's going on in Wisconsin. I mean, it has captured the world's imagination, both because it seems to be the downfall of democracy, in one sense, right? The whole thing has come gridlock while people run away, and it has become the touchstone for an entire conversation that's gone on. And today we're going to talk about two other topics that do the same thing. These big touchstone topics that kind of grab people where they are, and it sort of taps into the conversation that they want to be having. And I think one of the reasons this Wisconsin thing has become such a big deal is because whether you live in Wisconsin or not, you feel like the issues that are at hand there are issues that are at hand in a lot of places. Yeah. Budget struggles, thinking about the government, how different elements of the government get along with one another, how do we live in civic life, the economic situation that caused the financial meltdowns. And that's one of the things I want to talk to John about what he's what he has done in his description here on his blog, which you can find by going to Doug Pagitt Radio over on Facebook, facebook.com/Doug Pagitt Radio. You don't even have to be a member of Facebook. You don't have to be logged in or anything. Just go to facebook.com/Doug Pagitt Radio, and you will see a link there to what's going on in the Badger State. So, John, welcome aboard. Thanks for being on the show today.
Doug, thank you for having me.
Well, it is certainly your pleasure. I'm teasing. John is calling in from Washington D.C. So he sits in the hub of it all. He sits right in the center of where all of our democratic ideals are embodied in legislation and in marble.
John, why is Wisconsin on fire?
It's. I'd like to take a flailing stab at answering that, but first I want to actually correct something Doug just said. What's funny is in this
not a good way to start the interview. By the way, John.
No, I think in this case
I'm the only one who corrects what I say around here. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Correct
I'm
away.
Invested in the rightness of Doug, and there's one nuance here that bears emphasis. What's funny is I think to get the cardinal central misunderstanding of this whole mess is. Yes. For once, you have to not look to D.C. as the swirling cauldron of all of this. Oh. Yes, there were deregulative efforts in the 90s and in the O's, and then to a lesser extent in this decade. There were certainly enablers, plenty of them in the last decade plus. But you actually have to really, and not to flog a dead horse here, but you have to look to Wall Street and then to all the offices of every investment bank and every lender and every kind of hot potato passing agent in this swirling mess to grasp in some accurate light what happened, not just to Wisconsin, but to virtually every state pensions fund in the last 2 years.
That's a great point, and this is what I think is helpful about the way you've decided to describe this. And over at the link that you'll find at facebook.com/Doug Pagitt Radio, you'll find a 28-panel cartoon description of the state of Wisconsin as editorialized by John White. So what he's done is he's pulled this thing together into 28 little snippets that would say, what's going on in Wisconsin? Well, here's where we need to start, and here's where we need to finish. Now, it's editorial, it's John's take on things, but I think he's right. I think he's got it nailed. And he puts some fun little cartoons with it, which I think is helpful, because you take this very big, complicated story, and you tried to tell it in a way using a cartoon philosophy and theory and communication style to break down a very complex story and to put it into little panels that people could understand. First of all, tell me, why did you choose this style before we get into the to the ins and outs of what's going on in all pension plans and our economy as a whole as it's related to decisions that were made by Wall Street because of deregulation? But before we do that, why did you decide to tell this story through the medium of these 28 panels with little illustrations along with them?
Sure. Probably two reasons. The first is it's reductive and it's simple, but it's just because it's the media that I know, and it's the one that I most default go to. It's what I've been doing for years. It's the voice in which I can speak best.
Because you are an illustrator.
I'm an illustrator. I'm a designer, and I'm a web guy ostensibly.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the voice in which I speak best, and it's convenient because my first preference would be to have this conversation with someone one-on-one over coffee or a beer, but that's just not logistically possible because I'm here and you're all out there. So,
yes, there's just too many people to all fly there at one time to sit down with you. So what you did is you decided to tell this story in a way and to make it accessible as if you had jotted down on a napkin what's going on. So you decided to explain this to the average and ordinary ones of us. So,
exactly, and that in fact is the second reason why I chose this format is, and you alluded to it earlier, is this is completely incomprehensible, and so
the topic
to describe this either in prosaic text or even in video might still be too familiar to all the ways that this story in the last 2.5 years has been attempted to be described, and that's what's so unique and so maddening about this specific story is. It's so incomprehensible that the public discourse can't even really happen because you have to sit down and know what a credit default swap is and what a mortgage-backed security is, and you have to know what a investment arm is and a derivative, and that's so far removed from talking about what are our priorities about health or war.
It's like describing the dates of Easter or something. It gets so complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so you have really taken that idea, and as with the clarity that can come from reducing it down to a simple panel, have tried to explain 28 movements that led to this. And I think some of the most interesting parts for people come in the first 6 or 7 panels. Right, I think that before you get to a governor who decides that unions shouldn't have collective bargaining rights,
right.
There were other things that led to a situation that allowed for that conclusion of the governor to even be considered a realistic option.
Right, it's absurd.
But the absurdity came out of a particular set of situations. So take us back to 2000. What happened in 2000? Back at the dawn of the new millennium, when we dodged the bullet that was Y2K, before the war on terror, when we still were trying to figure out what we were going to call the first decade. This is more than a decade ago. What happened there that created the context for the situation that people are carrying signs in the halls of the state legislature in Madison, Wisconsin?
Oh, geez. Wow. Well, they were heady times. Those early O's and late '90s. There was the swing pop revival. There's some large seated chants, a lot of ska. But somewhere
the Seattle music scene thought they were coming back.
They thought so, and yet by that point everyone was done with flaming trees. But right in the midst of that, there was a collusion of just a ridiculously comical, smoke-filled backroom deal meeting that no one paid attention to, called the Commodities Futures Modernization Act.
The Commodities Futures Modernization Act. So someone decided that we should modernize the way that commodity futures are traded.
Yeah. Exactly. This was a collusion between someone we all know, Alan Greenspan, outgoing Clinton Treasury Chief Bob Rubin, and then his successor Larry Summers, and then fourthly their enabler in Congress was Bill Graham.
So the people in the Treasury Department, the person who's the head of the department that cares for the United States financial situation In this in this case, a fellow named Alan Greenspan. They
well, Greenspan more at the Fed than at the Treasury. The Fed is this spigot that controls the monetary flow and the interest rate.
And they told each other a story and decided that there was a way that they could modernize how futures could be traded by banks. Is that
yes,
right?
Although the word "modernize" there is a deliriously clever verb. Yes, technically, I guess it modernized it if by completely tearing away any safeguards. What it did was it deregulated this, and it essentially opened. And I am taking some prosaic license here, but the essence of what I'm describing is I would say accurate. It's opening the door to a series of things that to any outside observer are outright very simple and very stark gambling, and calling it something else, while at the same time taking away the powers of the SEC, of the federal government, of Congress, to oversee what is so brazenly and nakedly a gambling scheme.
And I like the way you put it in panel 3. You say, for the next 8 years after the modernization of the Commodities Futures Act, banking, which was formerly a boring and out-of-touch and reasonably predictable industry, morphed quickly into a crossbreed between a giant rigged casino and outright fraud. And that's really, I mean, it really changed the game, and all of a sudden banks were doing things that they were never doing before. And now we only have 2 minutes left because we babbled all this time away. Only 2 minutes left. They then created a situation that implicated what? Who was implicated in that big switch where banks were now no longer based on predictability, but on a new set of criteria that came out of the Commodity Futures Modernization Act?
There you go, and that's the key question. The people who were implicated were the people who bought into these repackaged investment deals that, for all intents and purposes, looked to be not only as stable as the relatively low yield Treasury bonds and Treasury bills that had been offered before, which, thanks to Alan Greenspan, were now only gaining maybe at best 1%. Not only were they as stable as that, they were AAA marked. They were insured to the hilt. AIG and other firms, Lehman, that looked completely stable and rock solid, which would later implode and we patch. So there are these essentially seemingly gold standard mortgage-backed security investments. But therein lies the problem, because prior to the CFMA, there was no such thing as a mortgage-backed security. It would have been laughable that you could replace actual hard cash reserves with something this big of an investment with notes that were themselves mortgages. And
we're going to have to push people off this because we only have 30 seconds left. And the people who bought into those newly positioned, newly marketed, really safe funds were workers' pension funds in states all around, along with other people's retirements and so on. But workers' pension funds, and when that market collapsed, so went workers' pension funds, where all of a sudden now states are having to say, we're going to have to cut budgets because that money isn't there anymore.
Nailed it.
You can find this stuff.johnwhitestudio.com or on the Facebook page for Doug Pagitt Radio. John White, thanks for your great work. Thanks for being on the program.
Pleasure to be here, Doug.
Hey, we're going to be back after this. Doug Pagitt Radio on AM 950, DougPagittRadio.com.
Okay. Read exactly what's on the cue cards.
That's just good radio.
Hi there, Matt.